I don't know what little image you have in your head of what you imagine Jesus to be like, who he is. But Jesus was not always nice. There was this group of people, Pharisees, and he criticised them. He said that they were hypocrites because they loaded people up with all sorts of rules that they themselves couldn't keep. And he used some really creative language to describe them, like a brood of vipers. That's not very nice. A brood of vipers. And he said that they were like whitewashed tombs, that inside they're full of dead bones and everything unclean. And when he called them hypocrites, he said that to their face. Like nobody would dare to say that to these leaders of the Jewish culture. And he said they were more interested in their social media profiles than what was going on in their hearts. He said, you're full of greed and self-indulgence. And he said that you shut people out from the kingdom of heaven. And he criticised them for letting go of God's ways and hanging on to human traditions, hanging on to church culture, what they were comfortable with, what they liked about church. They hung on to that, but they let go of the fact that God wanted them to reach people. And he said, even if you make one convert, you would then turn them into someone who was twice as much a child of hell as you are. That's not nice. But I'm sort of okay with it. But a couple of days ago, my little 3-year-old granddaughter, she's nearly 3, she gave me a big hug. And she says, Granddad, you've got a big belly. Tony, that's enough. Just don't laugh anymore. That's just enough. Just a polite little, that would be nice, but you're taking it to the extreme, right? And I was okay with that because it's true. But it's not something that's nice you would teach your granddaughter to say to anyone she gave a hug to, because you've got to have some filters. And when our daughter Mandy and Aaron were getting engaged, that engagement party in Sydney, and Mandy was meeting some of Aaron's family for the very first time. And she met one of Aaron's aunties. And she was obviously pregnant. And you know when you have a thought in your head that you haven't quite filtered yet, and you have an action that follows that you certainly haven't filtered. And so Mandy just reached straight out of instinctively and went, rubbed her belly and says, oh, when are you due? When are you due? And she just looked at Mandy and says, I'm not pregnant, I'm just fat. Now, that was not a nice moment for both of them. And I think they probably still remember that first encounter. But there is an incident that for most of my life, I've never really fully understood. And it's something that Jesus said to a friend. And it's always seemed overly harsh and unnecessary what Jesus said. It's something that a nice Christian would just not say to another Christian. Now, I used to jokingly say that I only really have 2 gifts in life. One is killing animals, and the other is upsetting people. And on a good day, I can do both at the same time. But I would never say to anyone what Jesus said to his friend, especially someone who had walked away from the family business, left everything to follow Jesus, who went on the road with Jesus, who wasn't getting paid. He was a volunteer in Jesus' leadership team. And at the start of this blow-up, It's recorded in 3 of the 4 first books of the New Testament. Now, Luke, when he talks about this incident, he actually leaves out the nasty bit, the nasty stuff that Jesus said. He just tells us the good stuff leading up to it. And I think I would have been tempted to do that too. But see, the Bible is not just a collection of Christian sayings. It's not a book of rules. It's a book of stories, of real life stories. And they're historically right and they're correct. And all the good, the bad and the ugly, it's all thrown in there. It's all there. Now, Peter was the disciple that Jesus had a go at. And he was part of the core leadership team of 3. And he helps Mark write the book of Mark. He gives him all the information. And Luke leaves this bit out, but Peter makes sure that Mark includes it. I think Peter's a hero because it didn't make Peter look that good. I would have left it out. So I want to tell you what happened. We've just got to start with a backstory because it's really important. It's significant. So what happened was Jesus began by asking his team for some feedback as to who people thought that he really was. And then he asked the question that really matters. It's, but who do you say that I am? And Peter goes, pick me, pick me, pick me. Just pick me, pick me. He's the first one to put his hand up. And through Holy Spirit revelation, Peter goes, you're the anointed one. You're the promised Messiah. And he's bubbling. It's coming out. He goes, and you're the Son of the living God. And there's like little high fives all around. And Peter's the man. And Jesus is patting him on the back, and it's so exciting. And all of the team, through this revelation, now understand, really for the first time, who Jesus is. And so then Jesus starts to tell them what he's going to do and what's going to happen next. He says that he must go to Jerusalem to suffer many things at the hands of these hypocrites, and that he would be killed, but on the 3rd day, he would be raised from the dead. Now, I think Peter only ever heard put to death, be killed. Now, in every Bible narrative, there's a really brilliant question for us to ask. And this is it. Who am I in the story? It's a really good question. Who am I in the story? Every one of us comes to Jesus on the other side of the resurrection. But Peter didn't have that luxury. He didn't have that advantage. And the only thing that Peter heard that day in the Easter story was that Jesus was going to die. And it freaked him out. Not the death of this. They've just discovered Jesus is the Messiah. And now there's a threat to his life. He's going to rescue Israel from the Roman occupation. He's a conquering king. No, this can't be right. And if Jesus dies, that's the death of the dream. The dream to be a fisherman of men, what Jesus sold them on. I don't know if you've ever had a dream die. If you've had the life of someone you love just snatched away from you, or the threat of that actually happening to you. But Peter's response, I think, was actually beautiful. It was raw, it was honest, and it echoed the feelings of the whole team. And he goes, "Never, Lord, never. This shall not happen to you." Now, when God told Abraham that he was going to zap Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham went into this little arm wrestle with God. He says, "But God, what if there's 50 righteous people? You wouldn't do that for 50, would you?" And he negotiated down to 10. And knowing that, it's sort of, I can't quite understand what happened next in the story. It's always left me just a little bit, I don't quite understand. Because Abraham got away with it, but Peter didn't. And I think the word that has created confusion for me in the story, it's the word rebuke. I think that's contributed to it because, see, just before Peter goes, never, Lord, will this happen to you? Matthew tells us that Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Now, rebuke, it sounds like a sharp correction. It sounds like Peter told Jesus off. Now, I have been rebuked by the best of them. There was a maths teacher that was so skillful at rebuking me, at telling me off. But what Peter said to Jesus that day doesn't sound anything like what people have said to me when they're telling me off. And I believe that Peter's words were simply just a heart response of a well-meaning friend. Now, the word rebuke, Matthew uses the Greek word epitomeo. It sounds like some sort of salad dressing, doesn't it? Epitomeo, right? And it can mean to admonish and charge sharply. But that's not what Peter did. Now, just stay with me for a moment because this is important, right? Epitomeo, its main meaning, its main use, its primary use is to adjudge. That's when you see the facts, you look at the facts and you say what you think is true. It's a declaration of truth. And that's what Peter did, and he did it privately. And the phrase, Peter took him aside, it can also mean that Peter said, hey, Jesus, and grabbed his hand and took him aside privately and then declared what he believed is true. Thanks, Theo. I sort of have this thing in my throat just to get a bit of sympathy, and so thank you. It's not COVID. It's just all the little pollens in the grasses that surround our place at the moment. But what comes next, it should shock you. It shocked Peter. Jesus has never said anything like this to any one of the Pharisees that wanted to kill him. He says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." This is his friend. This is his disciple. This is the one he praised for Holy Spirit revelation. It's all happened on the same day, this. And he said to Peter, I'm gonna give you the keys of the kingdom. And he pumps him up. And now he says, "Get behind me, Satan." So what's going on? Most of us forget that Jesus has a brain that works exactly the same as our brain does, which means he's just as vulnerable to the enemy's deceptions as we are. I am a repeat offender at swallowing the enemy's lies, of embracingly, willingly at times, his deceptions. And there was one deception from the enemy that I took on board that cost us everything physically that we owned. And it began with the desire to breed the best Angora goats in Australia. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. But it was enough to distract me, to sidetrack me, to take me away from what God had for my life, his will, his purpose for my life. And I was so consumed and driven, I was willing to risk anything to achieve what I was setting out to do. And at the time, if you'd asked me, I would have said to you, God is in this, and I could have even give you little Bible verses to support it. Coral and I, we remember this season of our life quite differently. And there's sort of in this decision-making process where we decided to get involved with a quarantine station in South Australia, sink a whole lot of money into it, for me to go over and live there. And so there was a year I lived there, and I would come home once a month for a couple of days, 2 days, and then go back again. Mandy still reminds me that I missed out on her birthday that year. I think every year she reminds me. There was a price we paid as a family relationally, but through this we lost everything. And in the process of deciding whether to go there or not, I can remember something Coral said that was like the tipping point. Now, in reality, I still would have done it anyway. It was still going to happen. I was just so set, that's where we're headed. Now, Coral is normally the voice of caution in our family. She's got wisdom. She's got discernment. In the twinkling of an eye, she can see all the things that could go wrong, just like that. It's amazing. It can be as simple as I put on a shirt to come to Redgum in the morning, and she asked this question, she says, "Are you wearing that?" That's not a question. That's a statement. She sees problems. And I've discovered the best answer is no, I was just putting it on to see if it still fitted. She can see problems anywhere. But in this process of coming to a decision, there was a day where she said something like this. These aren't her exact words, but this is what I heard. Just do what's in your heart. Go with what you really want to do. And in that moment, I felt so loved and so cared for and supported. And I knew she was saying it just to show love to me, to support me. But looking back, God was not in the direction we went as a family. He was never in it. And that deception that I had over me changed the course of our life. It took us through a season of great grief and loss and pain. And it all came because I lost track of what really God had for us, for me. Now, Peter, over the years, he's copped a lot of bad press for his actions and words that day with Jesus. But don't miss this. What he said came out of the mouth of a friend who loved Jesus, who wanted to protect him from harm. And Matthew slightly sanitises the story. He includes the words that Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." But he leaves out a little detail that Peter insists that Mark include in the narrative. And so I want to read you what Mark said, because he's got this from Peter. And this is what Mark says. But when Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan." Matthew leaves out that Jesus rebuked him, but Peter wants that included. And he did it publicly in front of the whole leadership team. And Peter wants us to know that Jesus rebuked him. And in this word, this time the word epitomeo literally means a sharp correction. He did it publicly. And Peter wants to know what Jesus did, but not just what Jesus said, but why. What was behind it? See, get behind me, Satan, is not nice. Like, try it to your wife. It's not going to go down well to your husband, to your kids. Like, just don't, like, it's just not going to be greeted with warmth. But then Jesus explained why. He said, because you, Peter, my friend, are a stumbling block right now to me. And the New Living Translation says, you are a dangerous trap to me. And he goes on, Jesus explains, he says, you're seeing things merely through a human point of view, not from God's. I think I've done that more than once in my life. Now, there are two things that Jesus showed us in his response to Peter. And the first is that he clearly identifies that Satan is the originator of the thoughts that Peter has just expressed. He could have said, Jesus could have said, liar, liar, pants on fire. But see, Jesus didn't know that little poem at the time. So he just went with what he knew. And then he acknowledged to the team, in front of all of them, how vulnerable he was to his friends' words, his friends' thoughts, his friends' opinions. He says to the team, I am vulnerable. Peter, you're a stumbling block to me. You're a dangerous trap. And in the desert, when Satan tempted Jesus, Jesus just changed channels with, it's written. Simple. He crushed this deceptive ideas of the enemy and he just exchanged them from God's truth. And our culture has actually done the opposite. It's taken God's truth and exchanged it for a lie. And in Romans, Paul tells us we can know when that's happened for an individual and we can know when it's happened for a culture, when we exchange God's truth for a lie. There'll be sexual impurity, which includes pornography, and sexual perversion. And it's important to know that Paul explains that sexual sin is different to all other sin because something inside of us gets broken. And we don't just need forgiveness, we need healing. Because when we exchange God's truth for a lie is unreality. And that messes with how we see our world. And in the desert, Satan didn't try to get Jesus to sin in the way we think of as sin. What he did is he threw everything at Jesus, tempting him to divert him, to distract him from his God's given purpose for his life, because that would have been enough. And that's why Peter's words were like kryptonite to Superman. And it's why Jesus had to shut him down so quickly. Just as he began, Peter said, Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. How did Jesus know that the words, these helpful words, these words of advice from his friend, had the potential to take Jesus out of the race, even more dangerous than Satan coming directly to Jesus, the words of a friend? How did he know that? When one of our girls, I won't name which one, but one of our girls was going through a tough time as a teenager, we had a close Christian friend, a pastor. He led a large church and he was a little bit older than us and had experience with his own teenagers. And he came to us and told us what we should do for this daughter of ours. And I believe to this day that had we done that, I doubt if that daughter would still be walking with God the way she is today. I think it would have taken her out of the race, disconnected her from God. So why did we reject the advice of a close Christian friend, a pastor, a leader in God's kingdom? Because it felt more about parenting culturally than it did about kingdom culture. It felt more about law than grace. And I had this awareness that even in the best of us Christians, we can have moments when the Holy Spirit speaks to us, like with Peter, or we can reflect the values of our own culture, the world that we've grown up in, what we understand, the lens that we see through, that's not God's lens. And all of us can do that. And all of us can have a friend that can do that. We can be that friend, or you may have a friend that does that to you. And what he said to us, we didn't follow through with. We didn't go with that. And for Jesus that day, he had just told his disciples he was going to face the cross, that he would die. And his own humanity, the Bible calls this our flesh, it was fighting against that direction. It was fighting in his mind. And Jesus knew that Peter's words, the words of a friend, had the potential to take Jesus out of the race. Now, what Peter said to Jesus was actually a paraphrase of an ancient prayer. The New King James Version translates it as, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you." But according to Bible scholars, a more literal meaning would be, God forbid, pity yourself, be merciful to yourself, favour yourself. See, what Peter was really saying, he wasn't saying, no, Jesus, no, don't do it, no. He was saying, God's not in this. Put yourself first. Put yourself first. It's like it's like a little Instagram post from today. Put yourself first. And watch how Jesus counteracts the enemy's lie that's coming through his friend. He doesn't say, it is written. He teaches kingdom concepts, a reality, a truth that's irrevocable. And now it's written. And I want to read you word for word in Matthew 16 what Jesus did in explaining this in response to Peter. He says, if anyone would come after me, and he's talking to Peter, but he's talking to me, he's talking to you. You. If anyone would come after me, she must deny themselves and take up the cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, and whoever wants to lose their life, or whoever loses their life for me, will find it. What Jesus just said completely contradicts the way our culture works, how people live, surrounded here in Australia. That's the opposite. And deny, it sounds like we're going to miss out on something that we want. And that's partly true. But if I deny a friend's wishes, I'm choosing to not assist them with what they want. And when Jesus says to deny yourself, he's saying, don't support yourself, the part of you that would derail your future. Don't support that part of you. Don't assist the very thing that will take you out of the race, that humanity, that flesh part of you. Don't give that support. Now, you don't have to be a Christian to know that if you're married and you have sex outside of marriage, you could blow up your marriage. And yet the enemy comes and he whispers, don't deny yourself. Put yourself first. This is what you really want. God's not in this marriage anymore. And again and again and again, that lie does its job. But for most Christians, that is not going to take you out of the race, that sort of mess up. For most of us, we are incredibly vulnerable to another Christian's declaration of truth, to their opinion, to their words. We're vulnerable to a friend that actually cares more about our comfort than our growth. And the only real protection, the protection that Jesus had from his own humanity, was this: knowing God's will and purpose, God's plan for his life. Because if you don't know that, if you don't have a way to measure what you're hearing, what you're getting from other people, if you don't have God's truth and know what God's purpose for your life is, you're really vulnerable. So next week, we're going to have a look at how you can know God's will for your life. But I want to finish with this. It's an update on this week on Bonnie's journey in the Sydney hospital. Now, some of you will not know, but Bonnie is someone that we love, that she's 38, and 13 days ago she had a lung taken out in a Sydney hospital that was full of cancer. And it was a 7-hour operation, and then the next day she had a 2-hour emergency operation to try and repair the leaking that was going on inside of her with this one lung that wasn't working properly. And then through last week, she was starting to improve. What I never shared last Saturday was that Bonnie, they'd done tests because she has cancer in other parts of her body, and they'd done tests last Saturday, 8 days ago, and all the indicators were that even after they'd taken out this cancerous lung, her cancer count was higher than even when she entered the hospital a week earlier. And they're really concerned. So while we were here last Sunday, she was having a full body scan to determine how bad it all was. And then I got a text from a brother after church last week. And he says this: what happened in Redgum today? I says, why? He says, well, and this is the text I got from him last Sunday afternoon. Bonnie's cancer tumour markers were extremely high yesterday, but today they are the lowest they've been throughout Bonnie's whole cancer journey. Her oxygen saturation levels have improved a lot today. And then he said her spinal tumour has changed a little and it's a bit smaller now. And then that led into Monday, and they were starting to get her up, and she did 30 steps on Monday. And then the doctor was getting her up at 8:30 on Monday night for her to do a little bit more of a walk. And then she just collapsed to the floor, wasn't breathing, unconscious, and they found that she had a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in her lung, and they managed to get her breathing again on her own, but she was now in a coma, completely unconscious. They had to get a second doctor to help do a catheter thing to get into her lung and get all the blood clot out. And that was a procedure that went through the night till about 3:30 in the morning. And that's when they put her back into intensive care, when she got back into intensive care. But she's in this coma. And they could not wake her up. And at 6:30 Tuesday morning, the doctors tried all they could, and they couldn't bring her out. At 7:30 they tried and they couldn't bring her out. And then at 8 o'clock, Andy, her brother, because we live stream this thing, because it's recorded, because it's not just about us in this room, because there are more people watch this on a Sunday than ever in this room. And this is a gift to the technical people out there and the money we've thrown into this. And because of this, Andy had Lynn's communion on his little phone. And he played it to his unconscious sister. And she woke up. God's communion, Lynn's voice. And Andy sent me a text, and this is what it says. Even the doctors and nurses said, "Who is that woman speaking? She just performed a miracle." And Andy says, and Andy's just a new Christian. He says, it was God using Lynn, a close friend, to help. And she went back unconscious. She did not wake up again till about 4:30 in the afternoon for 15 minutes. And she expressed appreciation for love for her brother and called out Lynn's name and prayed, and then was unconscious again nearly for another 24 hours. And then she woke up for 2 hours that day. And then the next day, she regained consciousness for the whole day. And today, they're shifting her back into general wards, out of intensive care, right? Now, she still has a journey to go. And for the last 14 days, I've been praying and fasting two meals a day, and I feel God wants me to continue fasting until she comes home, 2 meals a day. That's not to twist God's arm. That is a spiritual discipline that helps me pray. Now, it's dangerous for a church to publicly travel the journey of someone. Because what happens if they don't make it? And my own brother's first wife, Leonie, she died of a brain tumour at 38. And as a church, we travelled the journey with her. We prayed with her. We believed she would be healed, and she wasn't. And it really knocked that church for, I think, took 2 years for that church to recover the confidence in God again. But I believe that we are in a different season, and that it's really, really important that our theology is not based on what we don't understand, what we can't explain, but on what we do know to be true. And I want to read you a verse as I finish. It's out of John 15. It's verse 7. And it's on the Tuesday was when Bonnie was having this emergency operation. She'd already had a cardiac arrest in the previous operation the day before. And I'm praying, and this is what I said to God. God, I don't ask you for much, but I'm asking for this one life on planet Earth. Of all the millions and billions of people on Earth that are alive right now, I'm asking for Bonnie's life, that you would give us back her life. And Jesus doesn't half heal anyone. I can't find anywhere in the New Testament when Jesus says, sorry, it's a bad day for you, I can't heal you, it's not God's will. Everyone who came to him was healed. And Jesus says this, he says, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, that's the only criteria. There's no faith. He doesn't say you need faith here. And I'm thinking, yes, I am connected to him. Yes, I am. Jesus is in me. I'm in him. Yes, I qualify. And Jesus says, ask whatever you wish and we're done for you. And this is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. I just know. I don't have a gift of faith that Bonnie will be healed completely. I choose to believe. And the lie that says to me, but Leonie died, is a fact, but it's not God's truth. And we're going to be a people that believe God's truths, and we're going to see multiple supernatural miracles, because that's what Jesus wants his disciples to experience as normal. As normal. And Bonnie's private. She's shy. She doesn't want all this conversation about her. She really doesn't. She just represents the Bonnies that you know. There are Bonnies everywhere in our lives. You might be one. Right now, you might be facing something that's overwhelming. And we are going to be a people, a church, that sees God do what only he can. Every miracle begins with what we can do and ends with what God can do. Let's pray. Can I get the band up? Thanks. Jesus, I just pray for the continued supernatural journey that you've taken Bonnie on, that you would complete it, that you don't half heal anyone, that this would be a total restoration of one private individual, one little fluffy cloud in a whole blue sky that thinks, who am I? But you made her and you love her, and this is for your glory. And Father, for every other person that is hearing, watching this today, if you know someone, as we sing this song, if you know someone, if this is you, but if you know someone that is in need of the supernatural healing power of God in their life, whatever the circumstances, as we sing this song, can we just do that first song, Dave? Yep. As we sing this song, I want us to stand, and I want you to talk to God and ask him, and dare to ask him, and dare to ask him, and keep on asking. Let's stand together as the guys do this. Thank you, Lord.